So, with nothing else to say apart from writer, feminist, campaigner, commentator, all-round revolting woman, Germaine Greer.
Yeah.
Don't you look lovely? You look really lovely. I was watching Question of Sport this week, and there were two male panels, obviously. There's sometimes a woman, and there was Sue Barker, and they were doing their recognition-y things. Lots of pictures. Who are these people? They couldn't recognise a single female athlete. Not one. They knew everyone else in every other sport, tiddlywinks, you name it. And when I say that they were talking about Marion Bartoli, didn't recognise her, only won Wimbledon. Guys, Sarah Story, didn't recognise her. But the one that got me, really, was Louise Hazel, who's been photographed naked in practically every sports magazine, and they didn't recognise her either. Even though she'd been on one of the panels, on Phil Tufnell's panel, in the show, and he still didn't recognise her, and there was no embarrassment. It was, it's okay. This is bloke's business. These women come in at their own risk, and we let them come in and we ignore them. And that's about the best they can hope for. And I think, all right, why don't you want to play with us? Why can't we join in what you do? Are you trying to get away from us? And the answer to that is yes. Who would be an angler and sit by a muddy stream for 7 hours in the freezing cold, except for the fact the thing that makes it so nice is there's no women there. Now, I find it, we play all their games, and I think, why didn't we invent a few games? Some people think we invented golf. We certainly lost control of it since. So men play and do all those things, and we keep trying to join them. And every time we do that, they underline our inferiority. We play golf from a different tee. We play halfway down the fairway. We throw the hammer, which is a different size and a different weight. We don't jump over lower hurdles anymore. We're jumping over the same size hurdles. So maybe one day we'll get there, but we won't run as fast as the blokes and so on. And it's what they really care about is sport. And sport underlines all the time inequality, inequality, inequality. So can we just say, okay, bugger it, we've done our best. We tried to be equal, but you won't let us, or we can't do it. And maybe we don't even want to do it. Maybe the status quo that men live in is not a thing we covet, it's the thing we need to change. And by simply joining, now the EU's decided that directorial boards in companies all over the European Union have got to have a certain number of women. And interestingly, they do the same thing again. They don't have to have the same number of women as they do of men, they have to have a few less. They have to have 3 or 5. If it's a board of 3, 1 woman, and so it goes on. They've got to be in a permanent minority and permanently having to adapt to somebody else's standards, ways of doing things, agenda. So I really think we've gone about as far as we can go with this equality nonsense. It was always a fraud. It always placed women in a position of having to adapt to a pre-existing reality that they didn't approve of anyway. And we thought, well, maybe if we join, we'll get some power, we'll understand how the corporate world works, and we can change it. But all the evidence has been that it's changed women, the corporate world, before the women could change it. And it appears to be completely incapable of change. It is a completely sclerotic, falliform, organisational system. And everything travels vertically. All orders come down from the top. Everybody's in authority over everybody else. It's not the way we do things. And it's not the way we can go on doing things, because we know that those systems depend upon oppression and cruelty, downright cruelty. And unmanning people, I almost said, making people feel inferior, making them apologise for their existence, making them strive to be more like whatever the thing is that you want them to be. And I think we have to do something. And Hadley Freeman said that when she went to Brazil to cover the World Cup, suddenly she was getting death threats, and they were telling her they were going to kick her in the vagina because she dared to actually write about the World Cup. As long as she wrote about girly things, they could ignore her existence. Once she was standing right in their line of fire, they went nuts. Okay, now the first great betrayal was equal pay for work of equal value. Now some of us said, excuse me, work has no value. Number one, work is worth what you can force the employer to pay for it. There is no assessment of hairdressing as being of less value than tightening a screw on an assembly line. But as soon as the labour movement, itself dominated by men, who never accepted the women working in their own industries as equal, once they accepted that principle, the inequality of women's work was enshrined. And there was nothing we could do about it, unless we learnt to organise, unless we learnt straight labour politics. But they were already betrayed. They were betrayed by the corporate unions themselves. And so women did strike, women did struggle to get decent pay, and the result was the sellout with Barbara Castle that was misrepresented as a victory for the women in the movie that was released, year before last, which was an extraordinary rewriting of history and cynical beyond belief and greeted with cries of delight, even by the abominable Guardian, which is probably the most treacherous newspaper the women's movement has ever had. Partly because they pretend that they've got the message and that they're in a position to explain to us what that message is. And in fact, they haven't a clue. And their treatment of their female staff, with a few exceptions, is usually a pretty good example of what they're like at base level. And I'll have cause to refer to some of the things that they have done that I've interpreted as completely treacherous to the women's movement. Now, you may have read a story this week where the TUC said that part-time women workers in 50 local authority areas were working for less than the living wage. 3 out of 4 in West Lancashire and 2/3 of the council workforces in West Somerset. Now, what was odd about that is the BBC said, well, the women need to work part-time because of their home and family responsibilities. And you thought, men don't have homes and families? Gee, that's a bit weird. But the next thing is, a man working full-time in these areas earns £1, and the woman working part-time will earn 66 pence of his pound for her complement of working hours. She has no bargaining power. She's vulnerable. She can be dumped at any time. And we don't have a strategy for dealing with that. I think, how can we begin to exert pressure on the system? Because we're not exerting any. We thought maybe if we had more women in Parliament. Well, that didn't work. Parliament drove the women who were in it half crazy. And they tried to get family-friendly hours and failed even to get that. So where were they able to put pressure on the system? They couldn't, really. How do we do it? How do we form ourselves into an activity, a force to improve the situation? I don't have the answers. I'm an academic, the most useless people in the world. And I have no idea about organisations, and I can't stand committees. But we have to go that way somehow. And we have to also try to develop a plan of action which is inclusive of other women's groups. That we're not splintered, constantly splintered, and constantly set against each other, constantly made to quarrel and argue. That we have to arrive at principles that are so fundamental that the Women's Institute can understand them, And the Women's Institute's got a lot of power there. It's got a lot of infrastructure. It's got a lot of logistical force. We need to join. It's time to join. Now this might mean we have to bite our lips all the time, and we have to behave nicely and dress neatly and not shout too much. It might mean that, but I think you'll find that in fact there's more subversion, even in the Women's Institute, than you might have suspected. Women are getting bloody annoyed, and they have a lot to get bloody annoyed about. You know, even if you study the same subject as a man at university, even if you work in the same field, you are still likely to earn less than he does in the same job. And that's partly all that craziness about not telling people what anybody earns, all that covert behaviour that means you're at a permanent disadvantage in the workplace. Over, finish, should be illegal. And I've already said I don't think the corporate world is a suitable place for a woman. I actually don't think the corporate world is a suitable place for a human. I mean, the way that goes, it works by exclusion. It works by failure. Most people in the corporate world will fail. Ultimately, every life career ends up as a failure because of the tiny space at the top and because of the way delegation works in the corporation. That the CEO delegates and everybody else delegates. If the job is well done, the CEO takes the credit. And if the job is badly done, they ditch the person they delegated the job to. So, you know, management, the thing that the corporate world relies upon, is the art of taking credit for other people's work. And we're bad at it. We are really bad at doing that. We are workers. We want to work. We don't want to have other people work and then sit back at our big old empty desk and take the credit for it. There's no satisfaction for us in that life. And I think women really are finding more and more, we know this as a fact, I think statistically, that they're finding that the corporation is an awkward fit and they don't really want to be there. They want to be somewhere else. We have an extraordinary number of women, for example, who finance their own little businesses off their own credit cards. Complete insanity. Don't do it. But they do it in order to be what? Free. To be free to establish how they do business and how they treat the people they do business with. So you can imagine how bitterly conflicted I have to be about women being in the army. Are they mad? What happens when you go into the army is you become the instrument of somebody else's will. You can't even take moral responsibility for your own actions. You carry out orders. You've no idea why the orders are being given. You'll be told some bullshit, some inspirational notion that you're somehow fighting in Afghanistan to protect Britain. How they work that one, I have no idea. It must be a fascinating piece of exposition. But what do you find in the army? You find in the army that that also consists in humiliating people, in making them undergo ordeals that can be profoundly psychologically damaging, and if they come through, then great, terrific. And what happened when women joined the army is that what had been plain bullying between men now became sexual bullying. And so one of the principal instruments used against newcomers into the army was rape, sexual assault. And what happened when the women complained? It was usually their superior officer who was involved in the rape and the assault, and they were told to shut up, go away and deal with it, or leave. You don't like it? Get out. Some of them got out the hard way by killing themselves because they could not live with the humiliation and with the denial of their humanity when they came to complain. I mean, there's an extraordinary story of a woman going into her commanding officer's billet and saying that she had been attacked by her commanding officer, and he said, drop. That meant she had to drop to the floor and do press-ups because she'd broken the rule and walked in without knocking 3 times and waiting to be told to enter. So every time she tried to tell him what had happened, drop. She had to keep on doing press-ups. She never got to make her complaint, and her complaint was never dealt with. Now, women are reacting to this. But you and I know that the way we make war in the 21st century is against civilian populations. We don't want to join an army to kill women and children, to send bunker-busting bombs into crowded tenements full of people. And then listen to the story we're being told all the time that these wretched people on that little Gaza Strip will put their gun emplacements and their rocket launchers in crowded residential areas, as if they had somewhere else. Yeah. Do we really want to do any of this? Now, there's a little difference. I don't know if you've noticed, but the Peshmerga have a women's battalion. And that battalion, it's actually, it's a, what do they call it? It's a women's army. It's in 4 battalions. And then the brigades are headed by women as well. And what gives the game away is you've got middle-aged women who are commanding in those battalions. And they're, interestingly, if you're a soldier in America, a woman, you wear the same uniform as the men, which means that you can't have a pee when you're out on any kind of a job, because you can't get out of the stuff that make you put on. It's all subtly telling you you're in the wrong place. And the pressure is on you all the time. But in the Peshmerga, if you have a look at the women's, they wear the big Kurdish trousers, no problem there, get in and out quite easily. And they have the posture of commanders, and they're defending their homeland, which is a right that we all have. And that's why it was hard for me as a feminist to oppose women's determination to get into the army. You have got a right to bear arms, you have got a right to defend your homeland, supposing it is threatened. Whether you've got the right to be way up in the sky, not having the foggiest idea what's happening because of your weapons, when you're using depleted uranium and all that other stuff, when you're poisoning huge tracts of country, where you're leaving the kind of ordnance behind that will blow children's legs off for 3 or 4 generations. No, no, no. But we can't say that the women in the army have got a duty to mutiny, because we know what will happen to them if they do. And it's all part of our dilemma. Now, if I look around me in this most fortunate of worlds, I see that women in every age group are suffering, and that they cannot make their presence felt. We can begin with little girls. The whole story of giving subdermal implants and injections to girls under 15 because you suspect them of being sexually active, don't even have any hard proof that they are, but in any case, sexual activity with them is illegal, and also unprotected sex for them is seriously dangerous. Can we not persuade them not to do this thing? Can we not persuade them that there's a thing called a condom if you absolutely have to do it? But unprotected sex with under 15-year-olds, and schools are conniving at this. And no follow-up, no care to see what will happen if these girls encounter sterilising disease in their childhood when their reproductive systems are still not mature. How could we do such a thing? And how could they get away with it? I've begun to think in a dreamy sort of way about a women's defence league that steps in a case like that and says, we're bringing a case against you for the infraction of the civil rights of the child here, because you are making that child safe for criminal intercourse, safe from pregnancy. That's the only thing you're stopping. And what worries you so much about that? You don't care about them getting cervical cancer, you do care about them getting pregnant. It's all wrong. And if we turn then into the management of pregnancy in this country, mothers' rights. Now, feminists are accused of never having elucidated these, including me, when in fact in Sex and Destiny I talked about it a great deal. And how it was that a woman realised she was the end of the pecking order when she was in the obstetrics ward. That she was the earth that they were ploughing and everybody else was getting a product. Now we've put up with it for such a long time. We now have that strangeness where they want to tell us that everything we do is wrong for a fetus. We can't drink coffee, we can't drink cola, we can't suffer from stress. You suffer from stress, the baby will be strange. If you've still got circulating sex hormones in your body after using the contraceptive pill, your son may have hypospadias, or he may be gay. And all the nonsense and the pressure on women. They're told they've got to take folic acid before they even think about getting pregnant. And we seem to have lost control of it to such an extent that they can do things like close down whole maternity units in Clacton and Harwich and tell the women they had to go to Colchester. And somehow they had to find the money for that. And it was one of the poorest wards in Essex. And yet amongst the poorest people who live in Essex had to somehow get their prenatal care. And we all know we've got women not getting enough scans, women being terrorised by their scans, false positive diagnoses of even rare strange things. What is it? Why do they have to see inside our bodies? And what happens if we say you can't? I'm not letting you look. We're then irresponsible. Then everything gets worse. We're ignorant and we're reactive and so on and so forth. And if we go through then, it doesn't really matter. We can go into the whole area of menopause. What a conflicted area that is. And how much pressure we're under. The fate of the untreated menopause. You see before you an example of the fate of the untreated menopause. Of course, it's not entirely a picnic. It's true what they say about the decline of grip strength. So that you can't get the top off the milk bottle. If it's a Tesco milk bottle, so you have to use your teeth. Provided you've got teeth, which is another moot point in our society now. So if it's the most terrible example for us this week has been Rotherham. Yes. What went wrong in Rotherham? Watch the Guardian's contribution to that. The Guardian joins in all the parroting nonsense about PC, where they couldn't denounce the Pakistani men because what? That wasn't the issue at all. We all know what that issue was. That issue was the good policeman and the good everybody, probably, in Rotherham, deciding that an 11-year-old who's drunk with a Pakistani man in a room and is obviously being involved in sex is trash. You're not going to spend a whole lot of money trying to defend her or trying to protect her because you probably can't. Your view is it's like the girl you've decided at school. I don't know about you, but when I was at school, the people, when I was at university actually, we were a bit slower in those days, the people who were at it like mad were the people who were goody, goody, goody and you never knew. Whereas people like me who talked about sex all the time, how we shouldn't have guilt and we should be free, pure as the driven snow. But they would have given me a bloody implant because I talked about sex. They never get it right. So there they are in Rotherham deciding little girls, and 11 I reckon is a little girl, that these girls were trash anyway. Now we know there are operational difficulties in bringing cases of this kind involving juveniles. And that there's all kinds of pressures in the community. And there are constraints. I can remember there was a gang rape in Australia, very famous, that ended up with riots between Lebanese youth and surfies, mostly, only on beaches and whatnot, but it was a real public order issue. And there is an issue of management here. But the main thing was that nobody acted to protect them, or to heal them, or to help them. And if you want to take that a step further, you remember the case of Hamza Khan. Hamza Khan's mother, Amanda Hutton, was with his Pakistani father, Pashtun, I think, from the time she was 16. And she'd had 8 children by that man. And the Guardian told us that she was devious, that she was dangerous. It's a family crime. She's not a danger to anyone outside that family. But also they didn't even think about it. She'd been trying to get away from Aftab Khan for years, and she was so devious and dangerous she couldn't do it. And he still had access to her, and he was still leaving her pregnant. And she was in council housing with 8 children around her, and they complained that there was a mess, and there were liquor bottles on the surfaces. What? And how many houses are there liquor bottles on the surfaces? Where else do you put them? Hang them from light bulbs. It was the witch hunt on Amanda Hutton. No one ever mentioned fetal alcohol syndrome, which is almost certainly what was wrong with the baby who wouldn't feed. And she didn't know what to do about it, and she just gave up. And this is a woman who hadn't given up. She'd managed to keep the whole show on the road for such a long time, and then it all went to pieces. And she's got 15 years jail.
Yeah.
And how much good will 15 years jail do her? None, in my view. And still, Aftab Khan's comments about her parenting style were quoted as if they were justified. No one asked him what his contribution was. And heaven knows where those children are now. I've been trying to find out and have failed. So we understand that misogyny is real. But now the thing is this. Men's misogyny doesn't concern me. They can dislike us all as much as they like. I'm much more concerned about our misogyny, our failure to trust each other, and the fact that we hardly know how to organise. Men train from the time they're little boys to work in groups. They're hierarchical groups, which I don't find particularly attractive, and they're based on all kinds of bullying and pressure and game playing, and so you get one boy who's the clown, who makes everybody else laugh. You get Mr. Stephen Fetchit, who is used as an underling and a servant. You get what gorillas in the mist. You get a completely ape-type community. But the women, on the other hand, are collectively feeding each other's children, feeding all the men, the females in our ape community. Now, we've got the gorillas in the mist, but we haven't got the others. We haven't got the women who are working out ways of cooperative action, and who can present a united front, and who can develop a discipline that doesn't involve oppression. So that those of us who are more radical are prepared to stand on a protest with people who are a lot less radical than we are, without nagging at them about their failure to live up to our notions of what would be genuine feminism. We're still better at disagreeing with each other than we are in arriving at decisions that might help us to be more effective. I mean, is it just a dream that there might be a day when a young woman in trouble in a place like Rotherham or Bradford, where Amanda Hutton lived, will pick up the phone and ring the Women's Defence League and say, I've been to the police, they've humiliated me, help me. Now, you know, one of the worst places to be a woman in England is in the legal profession, because the legal profession is so masculinist, because it discriminates against women lawyers, because it takes all the best cases for the showman of the partnership, and the women struggle. And if they object to what they see as discrimination, and if they go to a tribunal, they will never work again. Anything familiar there? I mean, it's happened to train drivers. It's happened to women who rocked the boat. Can we start to develop a friendship with women in the legal profession that says, the way you do with a police lawyer, can we call on you in time of need? If we have someone who's being done over by the system, if we have a rape victim who has been sent away with a flea in her ear because, guess what, there were no witnesses to her rape, or it's her word against somebody else's, there are ways of dealing with that, and Helena Kennedy showed us that. Yeah. She took 2 sex workers' case against a man who refused to use a condom. They wanted him done for rape. The prosecution service wouldn't think about it. So then they took him on a civil case for damages. And what? Did that lead to a whole lot of this happening? Did that lead to case after case of sex workers getting some kind of decent treatment? No. Because, again, the onus was on the women to take this on. It became almost a life's work. And we can't all do that. And it's where the collectivity comes in here. We must know how we can lock arms, how we can begin to put pressure on a system which is so misogynist itself. I mean, if you think about, let's think about old women. Now, you think the country's misogynist, then when you're a woman, Middle-aged woman, it's getting a bit worse. Old woman, they see straight through you. You become a ghost in your own country. You walk into a shop and the shop assistants go, oh, don't let her buy any of our clothes. And you want to say, but I've got the money. We don't care. We just don't want you wearing our shit, okay? But then you think about the care home situation. 85% of the inhabitants are women. The people who look after them are women. Very often minority women, women who are already having a really tough trot. And they're left looking after whole wards of people all night long without any of the necessary training to deal with the kinds of things that are likely to happen. What can we do? We'll say, listen, these are our elder citizens. Please let us take care of them. Please start building the kind of homes they can stay in when they become less able, instead of shoving them into a care home to live, if possible, on their pension, plus a bit more from somewhere else. Hopeless, absolutely hopeless. And all of it affecting women. All of it, and the same situations have existed all my life. We hear the same complaints, whether we're talking about maternity services or talking about care homes or talking about childcare. Any field that becomes dominated by women has had it. There was Shulamith Firestone who said that. Shulamith said, when women and gays take over any field of human activity, it's had the prong, it's over. Now, Shulamith has gone to her eternal reward. I don't agree with her, because it's up to us now. We are 51% of the population. If we are happy that women have taken over a field of operation, then that's really enough. But if you even look at what's happened to GPs, GPs used to be elders. They used to be respected. GPs' social standing, their prestige, has lowered steadily ever since the intake in medical schools became more than 50% female. How does it happen? We are the ones who go to the doctor. Are we the ones who are discriminating against women in the health service? I hope we're not. But we have to understand how serious the situation is. I'm here today because I think the situation is so serious that something has to be done. I mean, how did Harold Shipman manage to murder more than 250 people? Most of them old women, who had no friend but him, who looked forward to his visits. Mother's little helper. The extraordinary thing about that is that the other medical practitioners working in the same part of the country countersigned his death certificates and laughed about it. Another one of Shipman's. Christ, all these women dying, they haven't even been diagnosed with a life-threatening disease. Now that should be impossible, and this is what I think in my fantasy the Women's Defence League is there for. But you want it to be a situation where, if the Women's Defence League says, excuse me, we want an inquiry into this, and presents the necessary documentation, they get respected. People are scared of them. I don't mind people being intimidated by me, do you? It depends a bit who they are. I mean, my dog was never intimidated by me. That's important. I don't want to frighten animals. But I'm quite keen on frightened people in certain circumstances. Can we do it? Look at us. There are so few of us here today. And we've gone to some lengths to get here, just to give each other a boost. We aren't alone in this vale of tears. Sisterhood, I wouldn't say sisterhood is real. What I think I need to say is that sisterhood could be real. But we have to make an effort. You know, when you think about how hard it is to do this, you think about persuading your mother of the rightness of your feminist views, if you're me, and you realise, Jesus, that's one person, and this is the size of the problem. How am I going to do this? Because the thing is that there's all that stuff about post-feminism. Feminism's over, you've got what you want, you got equal pay. Bullshit we did. We did not get equal pay. But even if we did, it wouldn't be an answer. Because what you have to do for that pay is humiliating and inhuman and dreary. Why do we have to give the best part of every day to an employer? Why do we only get the morning and the evening? Whose idea of a good idea is that? And we have to do, we're allowed to have 3 weeks off a year or however much they decide. And they seem to expect us to go on working like this for all of our adult lives and never to become disheartened. Now they're saying, oh, you working in the shop there, you won't be able to retire now at 65. You're going to have to stand on those tired old feet for another 7 years or whatever. Whereas, in fact, if you spoke to her GP, not someone who exists anymore, but this mythical person, you'd probably be told that her feet were totally ruined, and the one thing she had to do was get off them and go walking in the countryside, where she's never had the leisure to walk. But the Great Guardian's contribution this week, apart from making a page and a half out of a melted baked Alaska, made by a man, you'll notice, and the person who took it out of the fridge was a woman who has apparently cracked her skull or something by falling over. All of that. The other page and a half was a knee-jerk reaction to a report from the UN that 2.5 billion people on this earth haven't got access to a toilet. They actually used the word toilet. They probably meant what we used to call a lavatory. I'm not even sure if you can use that word anymore. Now, the interesting thing about that was what made them make a whole page out of it. It was because 2 girls had gone out to defecate in India and had been murdered. For crying out loud. I mean, now women have got to be frightened of going out to shit, even though they've been doing it for millennia. And because in a country of more than 1 billion people, 2 young women were killed. It's always a dangerous time. You can be robbed defecating on the railway tracks in Bombay any time of the day or night. The Gundas are there. It's dangerous. It's a dangerous country. But it was the way that the whole thing got mixed up with the gender issue. It's like women being afraid of public transport. No, darling, you're not going to get killed on the bus. If you get attacked, it's going to be at home. Most of you who will be attacked by people you know at home. But domestic violence, it's another thing we can't deal with. It doesn't matter how it presents, we still can't deal with it. Because women know that once you make the complaint, your family is dead. That what you've worked for years and years to hold together, you've given up, you've said, I'm out of here. And we don't do that. The thing we do is we keep going, we keep trying. We don't make hierarchies in the family. We don't make the children give orders to each other. We don't run upstairs when they're fighting with a flamethrower and say, I'll torch your bedrooms if you don't stop. We know about talk. We know about resolving crisis, resolving conflict. We know about peacekeeping. We keep peace in our families all the time. Now, it's about time these became our attributes in the eyes of the world. And I realise what I'm saying. There are feminists out there who say, women have a right to be as aggressive as men. Women, do they? Do they even want to be as aggressive as men? Is aggression good for anybody? Is it good for the people who have it? Isn't it another name for fear? Isn't that really what aggression is? Fear and hatred? And we don't live to foster those things. So I'm finished now. I'm an old lady. Got my rainforest, got my pythons. Still writing, still thinking, still talking. But I can't do the next step. I can't do that bit. I can't begin to imagine how we manage to institutionalize the values that unite us. Because they are so subtle and they're so unlike the corporate manacles that are put on every growing child in our society. So that what they have to have is not a life but a career. Now, all my life I've been a liberation feminist. And that's what I've said. We want a life. We want to be proud of ourselves. We want to use our creativity. We want to have dignity. We don't want to have to keep capitulating to our own distorted notions of male demand. We're nearly always wrong about it. So let's stop thinking about it. Let's start thinking about what we owe to ourselves and if you like, our children. Because at the moment, the future looks dreadful. Everything is out of control, and the urge towards peace has now become almost criminal. We have to rescue it. And that's enough from me. Now we can have a chat.
Thank you for coming today to speak to us. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Do
have a microphone, sorry.
Actually, I can't. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Is that better?
Yeah.
I'm so glad, I'm so delighted that you're here, and it's really inspiring to hear you, and I'm so glad that you're still angry. I wanted to ask, you wrote in your book The Whole Woman about sorrow and about the power of sorrow. I've been unhappy a lot recently about some of the things that you've been talking to, and I want to cry when I read the news and when I hear about Rotherham and things like that. How can this energy go somewhere? If you could talk about that, I'd be really grateful. Thank you.
Well, normally what we do in demonstrations is we go and shout and we be angry. And we're not really spectacularly angry, and we don't make a spectacular amount of noise. I cannot believe that if we went weeping, if hundreds of women went through the streets, streaming with tears, but maybe just symbolic tears, maybe streamers, but there needs to be many, many, many. Now, there have been great demonstrations in India where women came out with their thalis and beat them with spoons till the city was totally deafened by the noise. And what it said was, no. I can't remember the last time they did this, but it was so unbearable, the noise level was so shocking, that it really did have an effect. And also, in India, more than here, I would say, women, and especially older women, have authority. And if they decide on an action which is so radical, then people listen. We've got to try all of these things, but I think we have also to make our grief felt. We want to say we are not resigned. We have not authorised this action. If we get involved in further activities in the Middle East, for example, knowing that it'll be civilians who will be at the brunt of it, if we all go out and say we are not resigned, you have not got authority from us, but everybody's playing the same game. I mean, look at the poor old Lib Dems are unelectable now. They're the only people with any new ideas, and now they've got hardly any ideas at all. Because they got beaten over the head by the fact that they're a minority government, they had to keep trimming their sails to try and keep in with the flow. The whole coalition thing is gone, and for us, a coalition was a much better bet. We're good at coalition. We're good at coming to terms with each other. We're good at making allowances. And now we're probably going to get a right-wing government that is crazy. And we have to think of at what point do we join arms and say, no pasarán, you're not going anywhere, that's enough. Yes. Microphone, where did it go? Shout.
I've always found how you write about how capitalism and feminism intersect really, really fascinating. What a good speech, by the way, although obviously you know that. But I was wondering, what do you think about the surrogacy trade in India? I mean, obviously it's such a hideous thing. Do you think it's probably what we're seeing is the logical conclusion of rampant capitalism and anti-feminist sentiment? I mean, what do you think of it? Obviously, you're well-travelled.
Well, there's the big business going on in Australia at the moment about the child, the twin that was left behind, the Down syndrome twin. I was shocked to discover just how much Australians had been using surrogate mothers in Thailand. That was fairly shocking to me. But then there was the interesting discussion afterwards that the little boy and his mother were bonded, and so it would be cruel to take him back to Australia. I've always felt one thing about adoption, and I think I could extend it to surrogacy, which is you don't adopt the baby, you adopt the baby and its mother. Because women of my age are still waking up at night, calling out the name of the child they gave away. And we can't do that anymore. That is such cruelty. And it was always thought as a good thing. Charities did it. And I went to a Catholic school, and the nuns were deeply implicated in baby farming, in taking babies away from bad girls and giving them to good people. Enough, enough. That's another thing that has to stop.
In tears because I'm just so moved by all of this, and I just want to say it shouldn't be so hard for us to just be able to get together for a day. We shouldn't face such opposition just to be able to hear you. And two things. One is, one, I just wanted to offer an example of when what you're talking about did work, which was a few times at Greenham. We made ourselves invisible and somehow got behind the fence. Somehow we made ourselves invisible to all the squaddies, the military police and the men. I don't know how we did it. It just happened a couple of times. One of those times I was there. We got to a hive mind and we did it. I don't know how to translate that into London here and now, but it would be amazing. The other thing is what you're saying is how we get involved with things like the Women's Institute, how we make alliances. It seems like the only difference between us as radicals and them as maybe liberals is that we name the problem, we name men. And how do we, I'm just going to ask, how do we work with women who have a barrier, who don't want to name men, who want to say society? Because it seems like we do, at some point we do need to name what men are doing to us. And that seems to be a major difference between us and maybe more liberal feminist groups.
Well now, men are doing worse things to themselves. To become a man is really tough. And our boys, I'm fascinated to see, you have a son who's your best friend. Then as he gets towards puberty, it changes. He becomes satirical. Oh, Mum. He tells you not to drop him at school gate and not under any circumstance to kiss him. And then it goes on, and then we don't see this bit. But when he's being inducted into his football team or his whatever, the cruelty, the humiliation, the anguish. You make a man out of a boy by 1,000 cuts. You take away a lot of what made him so special when he was Mum's best friend. And the distance between you grows and grows. It's not so much males themselves, and it's certainly not testosterone. A woman of my age has more testosterone than a man. Testosterone is not a race poison, and it doesn't cause wars. It's institutions that cause wars, and it's the institutions we have to deal with. But I would say as a bottom line, though, we have to need men less. We have to be prepared to do without them. It drives me mad as a teacher to see how many of my best women students get screwed up because they get dumped a week before their final exams or whatever. And they carry that as the deepest humiliation. They had such great hopes of that relationship. They parlayed it into something that was deeper and finer than it was. And they were so eager, they went more than halfway to make it be like that. And then down comes the chopper. Now, I can say there, that was a guy who did that, but he was in over his head anyway, and he wasn't emotionally mature enough for that kind of relationship. It was always asymmetrical. My problem is that she is so vulnerable to that, and I want her not to be. I want her to be able to say, I don't care if I die a virgin. It's not going to mean my life wasn't worth living. It's not going to mean I failed at something. I have no idea what a pair bond is, but I hope I never fall into one. It's the neediness, and it's the willingness to invest all our emotional eggs in a basket when the basket isn't even there. And I want that to stop. I want women to be much more confrontational, much more difficult, spiky, not so ready to accommodate, not so obliging. I've got time for 2 quick questions now, or I'll eat into somebody else's time. Up the back, shout.
I don't really want the mic if that's okay. I don't like using the mic.
Okay.
I just want to ask, what you were saying about how women treat each other with female misogyny, especially like how older women are treated. How much part do you think women play in the construction of gender roles? repeat the question?
I'll tell you what the question was. It's sometimes hard when you're facing this way. I've been asked how important do I think women's role is in the creation of gender roles. And I've got to be careful here because I can make people very cross. But I do think that women are suckers for their sons in a way that they're not for their daughters. And the boys grow up, even if they're obviously dorks, they grow up with the idea that anything they do, no matter how hopelessly ill done it is perfect, because they did it.
Because I would like to make a point of that though, yeah, about like, you know, the thing about how masculinity is constructed, and how men are sort of like distant from their emotions. Do you think women kind of part in that so that they can have the control of the emotional domain?
I don't think so, because of the breach that happens. I mean, what has to happen to you when you become a man is they have to get your mother's milk out of you. And then they build the distance between you and your mother. So that you're not, you know, if you have lunch with your mother once a month as a grown man, it's abnormal. Whereas in Italy, it's perfectly normal. There are different ways of doing this. I mean, my father was taught in the army that the Italians were effeminate. Why? Because they were affectionate, and because they were touchy-feely, and because they cried sometimes. It's not simply, women do have a part in it. I think they are accessible to their sons in a way they're not to their daughters, and the relationship with daughters is difficult. And it gets more difficult. And the relation with sisters, you know, I mean, I started to study botany because my sister was a botanist. It took me, stupid, 10 years to realise she thought I was competing with her. Oh, what? She was my teacher. I didn't want to compete with her. But she felt that. So I did say 2 short questions there. One more question. Who's and about women's right to sexual desire and so on. And men had always thought, you know, that we didn't have much libido, and they had enough libido to serve us. So there was no shortage anyway. There was enough cock to go round. And then, when women actually discovered that maybe cocks weren't the answer anyway, then they suddenly realised that they didn't have enough cock to go round. That was the biggest emasculation. They said, oh shit, no, these women expect sex every night. Now, they'd always thought they could do sex every night until suddenly they had a chance to do sex every night, and then they realised, no, they couldn't do sex every night. So that's one kind of emasculation. And I'm making a joke of it because it's serious. The other kind of emasculation is done by men to men. Don't be mistaken about this. That men compete with each other, often cruelly, all the time. Men are never quite secure with each other, but they are so emotionally tuned, they are so homosocial in a way that we are not, because we're not tuned principally to women's feelings. We've got ourselves tuned to men's feelings, which we constantly misunderstand. So what I'm saying about men is just this: pay them less attention.
Germaine, sorry. I just wanted to one little bit more. My experience in terms of rape is that it's revenge. It's revenge on women for their feelings of emasculation. It's a punishment. And I just wondered if maybe a little bit more you could come back on that, and if you have an opinion on that.
Well, first of all, rape is not an extraordinary offence. It's not a rare occurrence. It's diurnal. It happens every day. It happens in every street in the country. Most of it never has even the remotest likelihood of redress. It took us so long to get it understood that rape was a possibility in marriage. People are very confused about that. But also, they get confused now about sexual assault. They think if you haven't got bruises and you haven't been knocked around, then you haven't been raped, which means they just don't get it. It is just the presence of a penis in a vagina which has not been consented to. It doesn't matter if it's all gentle and all lovely. What you've done is you've overridden the autonomy of another individual. I've always thought it was a crime against property. And it's a crime against other men as much as it is against women. But the problem is that in our legal structure, it is the state that takes on the role of the men. Nobody takes on the role of the victim. And the victim is only the corpus delicti. She's a piece of evidence. And therefore, she will be discredited. That's the job of the lawyer. And any lawyer can do it. The only people who ever get really done are people who are represented by idiots, by morons. There's plenty of them out there. So I don't think it's anything really. It is punishment. It is saying, I've got something here that'll shut you up, and it's treating the penis as a weapon, which it certainly isn't. It's very vulnerable, it's very thin-skinned, and you can make it hurt quite severely with a pinch. So then you have to think about the other thing. Why are women afraid? Why does a woman freeze with terror when a man hangs his cock out of his trousers? Why can't she think of anything to do? Why? And he's saying, I know I'm only a Darrow out here, I'm living on methylated spirits, but I've got this. And you want to say, well, it'll grow, take care of it.